welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be tackling the future of work, specifically how to thrive in our rapidly changing economy. We got some really interesting excerpts from Cal Newport's Deep Work from you guys. We're excited to dig into those, focusing on Chapter 1. Just imagine a world where machines are getting smarter, work is becoming more global, and the gap between thriving and just getting by is widening. That's what we're exploring today. So whether you're, a seasoned pro or just starting out, this deep dive is for you. We'll uncover the skills and strategies that are becoming increasingly valuable so you can not just survive, but truly thrive in this new landscape.
You know what I think is so fascinating is how Newport connects his ideas to current economic trends.
Yeah.
He brings up MIT economists Brynjolfsson and McAfee and their book Race Against the Machine, and they actually describe a great restructuring. That's happening because of technology.
Restructuring, that sounds intense, so it's not just about, jobs disappearing.
Yeah.
It's a deeper shift.
Exactly. Brynjolfsson and McAfee argue that technology is dividing jobs rather than simply eliminating them. It's creating a kind of digital divide, which Tyler Cowen explores further in his book Average is Over.
So who comes out ahead in this great restructuring? Newport highlights three groups, right?
Yeah, he does. First, there are the high-skilled workers, those who can work effectively with intelligent machines. Think of someone like Nate Silver, the data analyst who became famous for his accurate election predictions. His success stems from mastering these complex algorithms.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so it's not enough to just, know how to use technology. You have to be able to learn it quickly and adapt constantly. The pace of change is incredible. The ability to learn just seems even more valuable now.
Absolutely. And the second group Newport highlights is the superstars, those who are the very best in their fields, who can now reach a global market thanks to technology. Like someone like David Heinemeier Hansson, the programmer who created the Ruby on Rails framework. He used his deep expertise to create something incredibly valuable. That reached a massive audience.
Right. And the third group, this one seems a bit more straightforward.
It is, in a way. The third group is the owners, those with the capital to invest in these new technologies. Think of venture capitalists like John Doerr, who have the resources to back the next big thing. It's an interesting contrast to the high-skilled workers who are, mastering the technology itself.
Right, so we've got these three groups, those mastering tech, the superstars using it to reach a global audience, and the investors backing it all. But how do we as individuals actually thrive in this environment? Where does deep work fit in?
So that's where Newport's argument gets really interesting. He argues that to thrive in this new economy, two core abilities are absolutely essential. The first is the ability to quickly master hard things, like those complex algorithms we talked about.
Yeah.
And the second is the ability to produce at an elite level in terms of both quality and speed.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense, especially the speed element. Things are changing so quickly, you just can't afford to be slow. But what does this have to do with deep work specifically?
This is where Newport connects these two abilities to the central concept of his book, Deep Work. He defines it as professional activities performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that push your cognitive capabilities to their limit. These efforts create new value, improve your skill, and are hard to replicate.
Okay, so deep work is focused, intense work that helps us master difficult things.
Yeah.
And produce high-quality output. But how do we actually achieve this kind of focus when the world is constantly trying to distract us? Does someone like Adam Grant, the Wharton professor, actually just sit in silence for hours on end?
So he doesn't necessarily sit in total silence, but Grant is a fantastic example of someone who thrives through deep work. He structures his week very intentionally, scheduling dedicated blocks of time for specific tasks. He's very protective of these blocks and avoids distractions during those periods. As a result, he produces an incredible amount of high-quality research and writing.
So it's about being deliberate.
Yeah.
And creating the right environment for deep work. That seems key.
It is. And to understand why this works, Newport delves into the science behind focus and distraction. He talks about attention residue and cites the research of Sophie Leroy, who found that switching between tasks leaves a residue of your attention stuck on the previous task. This reduces your overall performance. Deep work minimizes this residue and maximizes your intensity, leading to better output.
Wow, that's fascinating. I totally relate to that feeling of still thinking about the last email I was writing while trying to focus on a new task. It's like my brain is stuck in the last gear. So if we want to achieve that deep work state, we have to limit task switching. It sounds like a real challenge in our hyper-connected world.
It is a challenge, but one worth tackling. Newport even introduces a formula that highlights the impact of intensity. High quality work produced, time spent X. Intensity of focus. Think about it. If you can increase your intensity, you can achieve more in less time.
I'm starting to see how valuable that could be. It's not just about working longer, it's about working smarter with greater intensity. But I'm curious about something. You mentioned high-skilled workers. But what about those people who seem to thrive on distraction? Like um, Jack Dorsey, running two companies and constantly connected. Does his success contradict the idea of deep work?
Yeah, it's true that some people seem to thrive in those kind of chaotic environments, and Dorsey's a prime example. But Newport argues that Dorsey's approach is very specific to his role. He compares a CEO like Dorsey to like a high-end decision-making engine, like IBM's Watson. Their value comes from processing massive amounts of information and making these rapid decisions.
So for Dorsey, being constantly connected isn't just a choice. It's almost like a requirement to the job.
Precisely. And Newport cautions against, applying Dorsey's approach to other roles. For most knowledge workers, that level of constant connection, it just leads to distraction. And decreased productivity, it becomes a barrier to deep work, not a path to success.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But if we're trying to cultivate deep work, where do we start? Are we talking about like literally locking ourselves in a room for hours?
It doesn't have to be that extreme. Newport suggests a few different approaches to like scheduling deep work. One is to schedule it in advance, like an important meeting, blocking off time in your calendar and protecting it fiercely. Another is what he calls chain scheduling, where you link deep work sessions together to build momentum over time.
So finding a rhythm that works for you is key. But even with dedicated time, the challenge is staying focused, right? Our brains are so used to distraction.
Absolutely. That's why creating the right environment is so crucial. It's about minimizing both, external distractions like noise and interruptions and internal ones like stress and anxiety.
So noise-canceling headphones and a do not disturb sign on the door are good starting points.
Those can definitely help. Newport also suggests creating a dedicated workspace for deep work, if possible. It could be as simple as like a specific spot at your desk or even a different room entirely. Even small rituals, can help signal to your brain that it's time to focus, like making a cup of tea or listening to calming music.
Yeah.
Before you start a deep work session.
Rituals are interesting. I never thought about how they could, prime your brain for focus.
Right.
But even with the right setup, doesn't deep work require a lot of mental energy? I can't imagine being able to maintain that intensity for hours on end.
You've hit on another key point. Deep work is demanding, and managing your energy levels is crucial. Newport emphasizes prioritizing sleep, eating healthy foods, and taking breaks when needed. It's not about pushing yourself to exhaustion. It's about working sustainably.
It sounds like there's a lot of individual experimentation involved. What works for one person might not work for another.
Exactly. The key is to find what works for you and make deep work a regular practice. Think about it like training for a marathon. You wouldn't expect to run 26 miles on your first try. It takes time and consistent effort to build the mental muscles for deep work.
That's a great analogy. It takes the pressure off a bit.
Yeah.
You mentioned Newport offers a variety of strategies. Anything that stands out as particularly helpful?
One that I find really insightful is his advice on embracing boredom. Our brains are so accustomed to constant stimulation that we've forgotten how to just be. Newport suggests deliberately engaging in activities that are boring, like going for a walk without your phone, or simply sitting in silence.
That sounds incredibly difficult, but I can see the logic. If you can handle boredom, distractions probably seem less tempting.
Exactly. And it's not just about, minimizing distractions. It's also about, training your mind to focus. Newport recommends practices like mindfulness meditation to strengthen your attention span.
So we're talking about a whole lifestyle shift,
Yeah.
not just a few productivity hacks.
You could say that, but the benefits of deep work go far beyond just getting more done. Newport argues that it can lead to greater creativity, improved learning, and a deeper sense of satisfaction and fulfillment in our work.
That makes a lot of sense. If you're constantly distracted, it's hard to get into that flow state where creativity thrives. You're always just skimming the surface.
And when you experience that feeling of accomplishment from deep work, it can be incredibly motivating. It reinforces the value of focus and pushes you to continue honing that skill.
So deep work is a superpower, especially in our distraction-filled world. It's the key to mastering hard things, producing at an elite level, and finding a deeper sense of purpose in our in our work, but I'm sure some listeners are thinking, my job is just too chaotic. Deep work is impossible for me. What what would Newport say to that?
Newport acknowledges that a lot of people feel like their jobs are just too busy for deep work. But he argues that even in the most demanding roles, opportunities for deep work, they do exist. It might require, some creativity and negotiation, but carving out that dedicated time is almost always possible.
So it's not about like changing your entire job. It's about like finding those pockets of time and protecting them.
Exactly. And remember that study Newport mentions? With the management consultants, they were convinced they needed to be constantly available to their clients. But when they were forced to disconnect for several hours each day, they found that their clients didn't actually need them to be to be always on, and their work improved. It's a good reminder that our assumptions about, what our jobs actually require aren't always accurate.
That's such a good point. We often create our own sense of urgency and busyness. But if disconnecting actually leads to better work, wouldn't companies want to encourage that?
You'd think so. But Newport points out that a lot of workplaces have actually developed a culture that rewards shallow work and constant connectivity. He calls it the metric black hole, where the things that are easiest to measure, like,
Yeah.
the number of emails sent or meetings attended, become the things that are most valued, even if they don't actually contribute to meaningful results.
That's a bit disheartening. So how do we change that culture? Do we need to like convince our bosses to value deep work?
It certainly helps to have buy-in from leadership. But Newport argues that individuals can start making changes on their own. It starts with setting boundaries, protecting your time for deep work, and demonstrating the value of that focus through the quality of your output.
So lead by example.
Yeah.
Show, don't tell.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to push back on that culture of shallow work. Politely decline unnecessary meetings. Turn off those email notifications during deep work sessions. And explain to colleagues, why you're prioritizing focused time. The more people who embrace deep work, the more likely it is to become a valued part of that work culture.
That makes sense. It's a bit like a snowball effect that
Mhm.
the more people who prioritize deep work, the more it becomes the norm. But what about those of us who are just, starting out in our careers?
Yeah.
Can we really afford to push back on expectations when we're trying to prove ourselves?
That's a valid concern. But
Yeah.
Newport argues that early in your career is actually the perfect time to establish good habits around deep work. When you're starting out, you have more flexibility to shape your work style
Yeah.
and demonstrate your ability to focus and produce that high quality work. It sets a strong foundation for your future success.
It's almost like an investment in yourself. Learning to do deep work early on gives you a competitive advantage. It's a skill that'll always be valuable no matter how much the world of work changes.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. The future of work is uncertain, but one thing remains clear. Those who can master the art of deep work will be the ones who thrive.
It's a call to action for all of us to reclaim our attention, to create space for deep work in our lives, and to rediscover the power of focused concentration. Think about one area of your work where you could go deeper. What change could you make to minimize those distractions and increase your focus? Even small steps in the direction of deep work can make a big difference over time. This is a challenging time, but it's also a time of great opportunity. By embracing the power of deep work, you can not only survive, but thrive in this new economy. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep going deep.